Before we begin, I have a few questions for you. Have you ever heard a story that completely changed the way you see life? Have you ever met someone whose real life experience inspired you to think differently? Or maybe you've gone through something that taught you an unforgettable lesson. Today's episode is all about real life stories, moments of courage, kindness, and unexpected change. These are the kinds of stories that stay with you, the ones that make you reflect on who you are and what truly matters. So as you listen, I want you to think about what each story means to you. Try to notice the advanced vocabulary and natural expressions I'll use, but most importantly, focus on understanding the message and emotion behind the words. Ready? Let's get started. The first story I want to share is about a young man named Daniel. He grew up in a small town and always dreamed of becoming a musician, but his family didn't support his dream. They believed that being a musician wasn't a real job. Daniel worked part-time at a grocery store and practiced guitar every night after work. People laughed at him, saying he was wasting his time, but Daniel didn't stop. He recorded songs using his phone and uploaded them online. For 2 years, nothing happened. Not even one song reached more than a few hundred views. Then, one day, something changed. A famous YouTuber discovered his music by accident and shared it in a video. Within a week, Daniel's song hit 1 million views. Suddenly, record labels wanted to talk to him. The same people who once told him to give up started congratulating him. Daniel said something that really touched me. He said, "Sometimes success doesn't come when you want it. It comes when you're ready for it." That's such a powerful reminder. His story teaches us that consistency and patience can open doors we never expected. Now, let's move on to another real-life story. This one is about kindness. It's the story of a woman named Emma who worked as a nurse in a busy hospital. One winter night, she finished a 12-hour shift and was waiting for the bus home. It was cold, snowing heavily, and she was exhausted. Suddenly, she noticed a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk, shivering. She didn't have much money with her, but she took off her thick scarf and wrapped it around him. The man smiled and said softly, "Thank you, miss. You're the first person who's talked to me all day." The next morning, Emma went to work as usual. Later that week, the same man was brought into the hospital emergency room. He was seriously ill, but he recognized Emma immediately and whispered, "You saved me that night. That scarf kept me warm." He recovered after several weeks, and before leaving, he gave Emma a small paper note that said, "One kind act can change a life." Emma said she kept that note on her fridge as a daily reminder that even the smallest gesture can have a deep impact. Here's another story that I find truly inspiring. It's about a man named Robert who lost his job at 45. He had worked in the same company for more than 20 years, and when he was suddenly fired, he felt like his whole world had collapsed. He tried applying for other jobs, but most companies wanted younger employees or people with digital skills. Robert didn't give up. Instead, he decided to go back to university and study data science, something completely new for him. It wasn't easy. He often felt out of place, surrounded by students half his age. But after 2 years of hard work, he graduated and started working as a data analyst. When people asked how he managed to start over at his age, Robert said, "You're never too old to reinvent yourself." That statement holds so much wisdom. His story reminds us that it's never too late to learn, change, or chase a new dream. If you ever feel stuck, think of Robert's courage. Change might be scary, but it can also be the beginning of something better. Now I want to tell you about a story that's both heartbreaking and inspiring. It's about a woman named Maya, who lost her sight in a car accident when she was 23. Before the accident, she loved painting, hiking, and traveling. When she became blind, she thought her life was over. But after months of depression, she joined a community center for people with disabilities. There, she met others who were living full lives despite their challenges. Maya learned how to use sound and touch to navigate her surroundings. She even started painting again. But this time, she used her hands to feel the shapes and textures of the canvas. Her paintings became famous for their emotional depth. One art critic said that her work seemed to paint feelings instead of pictures. Maya later said, "Losing my sight helped me see the world differently. I stopped focusing on what I lost and started appreciating what I still have." Her strength and perspective teach us something powerful. Sometimes the hardest experiences can lead to the deepest growth. Let's take a moment to think about what all these stories have in common. Each one shows resilience, the ability to keep going even when life gets hard. Whether it's Daniel chasing his dream, Emma showing kindness, Robert starting over, or Maya rediscovering her purpose, these people didn't give up when things went wrong. They found strength through struggle. And that's something we can all learn from. Real life isn't perfect, and sometimes it's unpredictable, but every difficult moment can teach us something valuable if we pay attention. So as you listen, I want you to think, what story from your own life could inspire someone else? What lesson have you learned from an experience that changed you? You see, language isn't just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about connection, about expressing who we are, what we've been through, and what we believe in. When you listen to stories like these in English, you're not only improving your listening skills, you're also learning how to understand people's emotions, culture, and ways of thinking. In the next part of this episode, I'll share more real-life stories that challenge the way we look at success, failure, and happiness. Some of them are about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Others are about small, quiet moments that carry deep meaning. So stay with me, keep your focus, and try to imagine each story in your mind as you listen. This is the best way to train your ears and your imagination at the same time. Let's continue with a story about courage, the kind of courage that doesn't come from physical strength, but from emotional strength. This story is about a man named Leo. He was a firefighter in a small town, known for his bravery and calm attitude. One summer, a huge wildfire spread through the nearby forest, threatening dozens of homes. Leo and his team worked day and night to control the flames. But when the fire reached an old wooden house at the edge of the forest, something unexpected happened. Inside that house was a frightened dog, barking desperately. The team leader shouted that it was too dangerous to go inside, but Leo didn't hesitate. He grabbed his mask, ran into the burning house, and managed to rescue the dog. As he came out, covered in ash, the crowd started cheering. Later, when a journalist asked why he risked his life for an animal, Leo said, "Courage isn't about who deserves saving. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching." That line has stayed with me ever since I first heard his story. It shows that true bravery is often quiet and selfless. Another story comes from a teacher named Sophia. She worked in a rural school where many students came from poor families. Some children didn't even have proper shoes or lunch to bring to school. Instead of feeling sorry for them, Sophia decided to take action. Every week, she stayed after class to help students with reading and writing. She also started a small project to collect secondhand books and clothes from nearby towns. Slowly, things began to change. Her students started to read more confidently and participate in class discussions. One of her students, a shy boy named Amir, used to avoid talking in front of others. But after months of encouragement from Sophia, he gave a speech during a school event that made everyone tear up. Years later, Amir became a journalist and wrote an article about his teacher. He said, "She didn't just teach me words. She taught me to believe that my voice matters." Sophia's story reminds us that teachers can transform lives, not through money or fame, but through belief, patience, and care. Next, let's listen to a story about forgiveness, one of the hardest lessons in life. A man named Carlos had a best friend, David. They grew up together, played football, and shared every secret. But one day, Carlos found out that David had betrayed him at work by taking credit for a project they both worked on. Carlos felt deeply hurt. For months, he refused to speak to David. He was angry, and the anger consumed him. But over time, Carlos realized that holding on to hate was only hurting himself. One evening, he decided to meet David and forgive him. Not because David deserved it, but because Carlos wanted peace. When they met, David broke down in tears and apologized. They eventually became friends again, though not as close as before. Carlos later said, "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it releases your heart." His story is powerful because it shows emotional maturity, something that takes years to develop. Now, let's shift to a story about discovery and travel. This one is about a woman named Isabel, who left her corporate job to travel the world for a year. She sold most of her possessions, packed a small backpack, and started her journey with just enough money to last 12 months. Her family thought she was crazy. But Isabel wanted to find purpose, something more meaningful than her 9-to-5 life. She traveled through Asia, volunteering in villages, learning new languages, and meeting people from all walks of life. In India, she taught English to children in a remote school. In Vietnam, she helped farmers build irrigation systems. And in Japan, she stayed in a Buddhist temple for 2 months, practicing meditation and silence. When Isabel finally returned home, she wasn't rich in money, but she said she felt richer than ever before. She learned that happiness doesn't always come from success or material comfort. It often comes from connection, curiosity, and gratitude. Her story is a reminder that sometimes stepping outside your comfort zone helps you find who you really are. The next real-life story is about creativity. It's about a baker named Thomas who lost his job during the pandemic. Instead of giving up, he decided to turn his passion for baking into a business. At first, he had no customers and only a small kitchen, but he began sharing videos of his bread-making process online, showing how to bake with love, not just ingredients. Slowly, people started following him. His videos went viral because he didn't just show recipes, he shared stories behind each loaf, stories about his grandmother, his hometown, and his struggles. Within a year, Thomas opened his own bakery called Rise Again. When asked about the name, he said, "It's not just about bread rising in the oven, it's about people rising after falling." Isn't that beautiful? His story shows how creativity and resilience can turn a difficult time into an opportunity for growth. Now, let's hear about an inspiring story of environmental change. A young woman named Aisha from Kenya noticed that her village was facing serious water problems because of deforestation. Instead of waiting for help, she started a local campaign to plant trees. At first, only a few people joined her, but after a few months, hundreds of volunteers began planting trees across the region. The movement grew so much that nearby villages started doing the same. When journalists asked her what motivated her, she said, "We can't change the whole world, but we can change our small part of it." Her words remind us that every positive action counts, no matter how small it seems. Aisha's story also teaches us advanced expressions like taking initiative and making an impact, phrases you can use to describe people who create positive change. Now let's explore a story about family and second chances. It's about a man named Eric who hadn't spoken to his father for almost 15 years. Their relationship broke after a big argument when Eric was in his 20s. He always felt that his father didn't understand him. Years passed, and one day, Eric received a phone call. His father was in the hospital. He hesitated, but finally decided to visit. When he entered the room, his father looked weak, but smiled and said, "I've missed you, son." In that moment, all the years of anger disappeared. They talked for hours, sharing memories, regrets, and laughter. When his father passed away a few months later, Eric said he was grateful he had the chance to say goodbye. This story reminds us that pride can sometimes keep us away from love. Forgiveness, even late in life, can heal the deepest wounds. Now, let's move to a story about an artist named Lena. She was known for painting cityscapes, tall buildings, busy streets, and colorful lights. But after the death of her younger brother, she lost her inspiration. For almost a year, she didn't paint anything. One day, she decided to visit the countryside to clear her mind. There, she saw children playing, farmers working, and sunsets that painted the sky with gold and orange. Slowly, her creativity returned. She began painting nature instead of cities. Her art became softer, more emotional, and full of life. One critic said her new work looked like hope reborn through color. When she exhibited her paintings, she said, "Art helped me heal. It gave me a way to express what words couldn't." Her story shows how art isn't just about beauty, it's about transformation. It can help us process emotions, rebuild our strength, and find peace again. Another real-life story that deserves to be told is about teamwork and unity. During a severe flood in a small village in Thailand, people lost their homes and electricity. Instead of waiting for rescue teams, the villagers came together. They built temporary shelters, cooked food for everyone, and made a small boat from wooden doors to help carry supplies. One man said, "We didn't need to speak the same language. We just helped each other." When you think about it, this story reflects something essential about humanity, our ability to unite in times of crisis. In English, we call this community spirit or solidarity. These expressions describe people helping one another without expecting anything in return. Now, let's move on to another story, one about dreams that take time. There was a young woman named Clara who always wanted to become an author. She wrote her first novel at 19, but it was rejected by more than 20 publishers. Most people would have stopped trying, but Clara didn't. She kept writing every single day. She said she wrote not for fame, but because writing made her feel alive. 10 years later, one small publisher finally accepted her manuscript. That book became a bestseller and was translated into several. Let's continue with the next real-life story, one about hope and survival. This story is about a man named Ethan, a mountain climber who faced one of the most dangerous moments of his life. During a climbing expedition in the Himalayas, a sudden snowstorm hit the group. Temperatures dropped below freezing and visibility became almost zero. Ethan and his team got separated. He spent 2 nights alone on the mountain, with no food and very little water. Many would have given up, but Ethan kept talking to himself, saying, "I will see the sunrise again." That phrase became his motivation to survive. On the 3rd day, rescuers found him half frozen but alive. When he recovered, journalists asked how he managed to stay calm in such a terrifying situation. He said, "The mind gives up before the body does. You must train your thoughts to stay strong even when everything around you is falling apart." His story is more than survival. It's about mental endurance. It reminds us that strength doesn't always come from muscles. It often comes from mindset and belief. Now let's hear a story about friendship and unexpected kindness. A college student named Sarah used to take the same bus to university every morning. There was an older man who sat at the same stop every day selling handmade bracelets. Sarah bought one once, and he smiled warmly, saying, "For good luck." Over the years, they started greeting each other daily, even when she didn't buy anything. One morning, Sarah learned that the man had passed away. She felt an unexpected sadness. A few days later, she received a small envelope at her university. Inside was a note written by the man before his death. It said, "Thank you for noticing me when most people didn't. You made my days brighter." Sarah said that moment changed how she saw people. She realized that simple kindness, a smile, a greeting, can make a person feel seen and valued. Advanced learners can learn from this too. Communication isn't only about speaking perfect English. It's also about emotional connection and empathy. Now, let's hear about a story about resilience in the face of loss. A man named Victor lost his business during an economic crisis. He had worked years building it, but one unexpected event took it all away. He felt defeated. For months, he couldn't sleep well, constantly worrying about the future. Then one evening, while walking in the park, he saw a little boy trying to fly a kite. The wind kept blowing the kite down, but the boy didn't give up. He kept running, trying again and again, until it finally lifted into the sky. Victor watched and realized something simple but powerful. Success comes to those who keep trying, no matter how many times they fall. The next day, he started over, this time with a new business idea, smaller but stronger. He called his new company Skyrise in honor of that moment. Within 3 years, it became even more successful than his first one. He later said, "That boy taught me a lesson without saying a word." His story is a perfect example of learning through observation and resilience. Now, let's move on to a story about cultural exchange. A student named Keiko from Japan moved to Canada to study English. At first, she struggled with the language and often felt shy speaking in class. Her accent made her nervous, and she worried people might not understand her. One day, her teacher encouraged her to give a presentation about Japanese culture. Keiko prepared carefully and shared stories about traditional festivals, tea ceremonies, and her family's New Year celebrations. To her surprise, her classmates were fascinated. They asked many questions, and for the first time, Keiko spoke confidently for almost 20 minutes without hesitation. After class, several students thanked her for teaching them something new. That experience completely changed her attitude. She realized her accent wasn't a weakness. It was part of her identity. She said, "When you speak a second language, you don't lose who you are. You add another way to connect." Her story is a beautiful reminder that confidence in language learning comes from self-acceptance, not perfection. The next story is about invention and creativity. A teenager named Noah loved building things from old materials. His village had constant electricity problems, and people often lived without light at night. One day, he found an old fan motor, a bicycle chain, and some wires. Using those parts, he created a small, wind-powered generator that could light up 3 bulbs. His neighbors were amazed. Soon, he began teaching others how to make the same device. Years later, he received a scholarship to study engineering. When asked how he learned to build such things, he smiled and said, "When you have limited resources, creativity becomes your strongest tool." His story teaches us a valuable lesson about problem solving. It shows that innovation doesn't always come from technology or money. Sometimes it begins with curiosity and a desire to help others. Now, let's explore a story of transformation. A woman named Maria lived a very fast-paced life as a marketing executive. She worked long hours, earned good money, but felt empty inside. One day, during a trip to a small village, she met a group of children playing football with a ball made of old clothes. They invited her to play, and she couldn't stop laughing. It had been years since she felt that free. That moment made her rethink her lifestyle.
A few months later, Maria left her job and started a nonprofit organization that builds playgrounds for underprivileged children. Her life changed completely. She said, "I used to chase success. Now I chase meaning." Her words carry deep truth. Sometimes real happiness begins when we slow down and reconnect with simple joys. Here's another real-life story about learning from failure. A young chef named Oliver wanted to open his own restaurant. He borrowed money, found a small location, and opened it with high hopes. But after a year, the restaurant failed. He was heartbroken. Instead of giving up, Oliver analyzed every mistake he made: poor location, limited marketing, and too many expensive dishes. He spent the next 2 years working under famous chefs to learn more. When he opened his second restaurant, it became a success. His food wasn't just delicious, it told stories of trial, patience, and rebirth. Oliver said, "Failure was my greatest teacher." This is an important message for anyone learning English too. Mistakes are not the end. They are part of progress. Each error is a step towards mastery. Now let's shift to a story about compassion. During the pandemic, a taxi driver named Hassan continued working even when most people stayed home. One day, he picked up an old woman who was going to the hospital. She didn't have enough money to pay the fare. Hassan refused to take her money and said, "Take care of yourself first." Months later, he received a letter from the same woman. Inside was a thank you note and some money. She wrote, "You helped me when no one else did. I'm healthy again, thanks to your kindness." Hassan said that letter meant more to him than any tip he had ever received. His story reminds us that genuine kindness doesn't need an audience. It's a quiet act that can leave a lasting memory in someone's life. Now let's listen to a story about change in technology. A farmer named Luis lived in a small village in Peru. For decades, his family had used traditional methods to grow crops. But when climate change started affecting the weather, his farm suffered. Instead of giving up, Luis decided to learn how to use digital tools. He took free online courses on agriculture, learned to use drones, and collected weather data to plan his planting seasons. Within 2 years, his farm's production doubled. Other farmers began coming to him for advice. He said, "Technology is not just for the young or for the city. It's for anyone willing to learn." His story highlights how learning never stops, no matter your age or background. It's also a great example of applying knowledge practically, something every language learner should aim to do. Now let's talk about a story about honesty and integrity. A cashier named Yulia found a wallet on the floor of the supermarket where she worked. It contained a large amount of cash and important documents. She immediately handed it to the manager. A few hours later, the owner, an elderly man, came back looking panicked. When Yulia returned the wallet, he was so relieved that he offered her a reward. She politely refused and said, "Doing the right thing is reward enough." The man later wrote a letter to the supermarket praising Yulia's honesty. She said that moment reminded her how integrity defines who we are, not when people are watching, but when they aren't. This is a great reminder of moral values expressed through simple actions. Next, I want to tell you a story that shows the power of community and education. In a small African village, there was no school building, so classes were held under a large tree.
Let's continue with another real-life story that will inspire you to think differently about success. This story is about a man named Liam, who dreamed of becoming a professional dancer. But when he told people about his dream, most laughed at him. They said dancing wasn't a real career, especially for someone from a small town like his. Still, Liam practiced every single day, sometimes on the street, sometimes in the park, and sometimes in his small living room, where the floor creaked with every step. He posted videos of his dancing online, but for a long time, no one noticed.
Then one day, a professional choreographer saw one of his videos and invited him to join a dance company in the city. Liam was nervous at first because he had never taken formal lessons, but he accepted the challenge and worked harder than ever. Within a few years, he became a full-time performer. He said, "If you wait for the perfect opportunity, you'll never start. But if you start now, opportunities will find you." His story shows that passion can create paths where none existed before. Now, let's hear a story about an act of honesty that changed a life. A young student named Clara was walking home one evening when she found an envelope full of money on the sidewalk. It looked like someone had dropped their salary. She opened it, saw a name written on the corner, and decided to find the owner. After some effort, she discovered that it belonged to an old woman who had lost her savings earlier that day. The woman cried with relief when Clara returned it. Later, she called Clara's school and donated money for scholarships, saying, "I want to support students who live with honesty and heart." Clara said that moment made her realize that doing the right thing always brings something good back, even if it's not in the form you expect. Next, let's go to a story about personal transformation. A man named Omar had a difficult teenage life. He dropped out of school and spent years doing odd jobs. But when he turned 30, he decided to change his life completely. He started taking evening classes to finish his education. He studied English, history, and computer skills. At first, people laughed and said it was too late for him to start again. But Omar didn't listen. He said, "I'm not too old to learn. I'm just late to begin." After 4 years of study, he earned his degree and got a job at a technology company. When asked what kept him going, he said, "The desire to grow is stronger than the fear of failing." His story shows that no matter your age or background, learning can always transform your future. Now, let's move on to a story about empathy. During a busy morning on the subway, a woman named Grace noticed a young man standing quietly with his head down. Everyone around him looked impatient and tired. When the train suddenly stopped, the young man fell to the floor, trembling. Most people froze, unsure of what to do. Grace quickly knelt beside him, realized he was having a seizure, and called for help. She stayed with him until the train reached the next station. When the paramedics arrived, they said her quick response had saved his life. Later, the young man's mother contacted Grace to thank her. Grace said she didn't feel like a hero. She simply acted out of instinct and compassion. This story reminds us that kindness doesn't always come from planning or effort. Sometimes it's about being present and caring in the right moment. The next story is about creative thinking. A young architect named Daniel was asked to design a school in a remote area of Africa, where materials were limited and the budget was small. Instead of importing expensive construction materials, he worked with local builders to create walls using clay, sand, and recycled bottles. The result was not only beautiful, but also sustainable. The school stayed cool in the heat and warm during cold nights. When journalists visited, Daniel said, "Architecture is not just about design. It's about solving problems in creative ways." His story is a wonderful example of how intelligence and imagination can change communities. It also introduced us some useful advanced words like innovation, sustainability, and resourcefulness, all important for describing creative solutions in English. Now, here's a story about unexpected opportunity. A young mother named Lily worked as a cleaner in an office building. She was hardworking, always polite, and spoke very little English. One evening after finishing her shift, she saw an employee struggling with the office printer. Lily quietly helped him fix it because she had learned about printers from her previous job. The employee thanked her and started chatting. He discovered that Lily had studied engineering years ago, but had to stop working after moving to another country. He introduced her to the company's manager, and a few months later, Lily got a job as a technician there. She said, "I thought my career was over, but sometimes opportunity knocks when you least expect it. Her story shows that humility and kindness can open doors that hard work alone cannot. Now, let's hear a story about friendship across cultures. A man named Ahmed from Egypt moved to Italy for work. At first, he felt lonely because of the language barrier. He didn't know anyone and everything felt different. The food, the customs, even the humor. But one day, he met his neighbor, an elderly Italian man named Marco, who invited him for coffee. Despite their limited English, they communicated through gestures, smiles, and laughter. Over time, Ahmed started teaching Marco Arabic words, and Marco taught Ahmed Italian. They became close friends. Ahmed said, "Friendship doesn't need a shared language. It needs shared respect." That story perfectly illustrates cultural exchange and the power of human connection beyond words. Let's move on to another story, one about overcoming fear. A woman named Natalia had a fear of public speaking since childhood. Whenever she stood in front of a group, her voice would shake and her hands would sweat. But she dreamed of becoming a motivational speaker. To conquer her fear, she decided to face it step by step. She joined a local speaking club, gave short talks, and recorded herself to practice. The first few times were difficult, but she didn't stop. After 2 years of training, she gave a speech at a youth conference. People stood up and clapped when she finished. Natalia said, "Fear doesn't disappear. You just learn to move forward with it." Her story is an excellent reminder that confidence comes from repetition and courage, not from perfection. Now, let's explore a story about community leadership. A young man named Pablo grew up in a poor neighborhood where many young people dropped out of school. Instead of leaving his area, he decided to make a difference. He started free weekend classes to teach English and computer skills. At first, only 5 students came, but soon dozens joined. His initiative spread and volunteers from other towns began helping. Today, Pablo's program supports hundreds of students every year. He said, "If you want change, be the one who starts it." His story shows how leadership can begin from one simple act of service. It's a perfect real-life example of commitment and social impact, 2 phrases often used in advanced English when discussing community development. Here's another story, this one about determination and art. A girl named Zoe was born with a hearing disability. She loved music, but couldn't hear it clearly. Instead of giving up, she learned to feel music through vibration. She placed her hands on speakers and memorized the rhythms by touch. With practice, she began performing dances that perfectly matched the beat of songs. Her performances became popular online, inspiring thousands of people. When someone asked how she could dance so perfectly without hearing music, she said, "You don't need to hear music to feel it." That's an extraordinary message. It reminds us that human potential has no limits when passion meets creativity. Now, let's move to a story about rediscovering joy. After retiring, Henry felt lost. He had worked for 40 years and didn't know what to do with his free time. One day, his granddaughter gave him a watercolor set. He had never painted before, but he decided to try. Slowly, painting became his daily habit. Within months, he started sharing his artwork online and people loved it. He even began teaching art to other retirees. Henley said, "I thought my best years were behind me, but it turns out they were just beginning." His story proves that it's never too late to explore new passions or reinvent yourself. Let's hear a story about forgiveness within family. A young woman named Elena hadn't spoken to her sister for years after a disagreement about money. They both felt hurt and angry. But when their mother became ill, they had to meet again. Seeing her sister's tired face, Elena suddenly realized how much time they had wasted being angry. She decided to talk honestly and let go of her pride. That night, they cried, laughed, and shared memories like before. Elena said, "Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it gives the future a chance." Her story is powerful because it teaches emotional maturity, which advanced learners can express through idioms like bury the hatchet or make amends. Now, let's go to a story about perseverance in science. A young researcher named Priya was working on a medical project that failed multiple times. She spent 4 years testing formulas that didn't work. Her colleagues advised her to stop, but she believed.
Let's continue with another powerful story. This one is about courage and forgiveness. It's the story of a man named Ethan who once made a big mistake that changed his life completely. When he was in his early 20s, Ethan was careless while driving one night and caused an accident that injured another person. He wasn't drunk or distracted, but he was driving too fast on a wet road. The guilt consumed him. He felt like he didn't deserve to live a normal life again. The person he hurt, a man named Peter, had to stay in the hospital for months. Ethan visited Peter every week, even though it was painful. He apologized countless times, but Peter never responded. Then, one day, Peter finally spoke. He said, "You can't change what happened, but you can change what you do from now on." Those words changed Ethan's life. He decided to dedicate his time to teaching safe driving at schools. He shared his own story with teenagers, showing them how one bad decision could affect many lives. Over the years, Ethan and Peter actually became close friends. Their friendship showed that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about choosing peace over pain. Now, here's another story that will make you think differently about failure. It's about Sofia, an architect from Spain. When she was younger, she worked for a large design company and dreamed of creating her own eco-friendly buildings. One day, she presented a project idea that combined modern architecture with natural materials like bamboo and clay. Her boss laughed and said her design looked like the child's dream house. Sophia felt embarrassed, but deep down, she believed in her vision. She quit her job and started her own small firm. For the first year, she didn't get any clients. Her savings were running out, and many nights she thought about giving up. But then, a small eco-resort owner gave her a chance. The building Sophia designed was stunning, natural, beautiful, and efficient. Photos of her project went viral, and soon people from around the world wanted her designs. When asked about her journey, Sophia said, "Failure taught me to listen to my heart, not to the noise around me." Her story reminds us that rejection can sometimes be the first step to success, not the end of it. The next story is about a boy named Leo from Brazil who grew up in poverty. His family couldn't afford electricity, so he studied under the streetlights every evening. People used to mock him, calling him the boy of the lamp. But Leo didn't care. He worked hard, won a scholarship, and eventually studied engineering. Years later, he invented a low-cost solar light made from recycled plastic bottles. His invention brought light to thousands of poor households in rural areas. When journalists asked him why he cared so much about helping others, Leo smiled and said, "Because I know what darkness feels like." That line carries so much meaning. It shows how people who have experienced pain often turn it into motivation to help others. Leo's journey is proof that where you start in life doesn't determine where you end up. What matters most is your mindset and determination. Now, let's shift to a story about teamwork. There was a group of high school students in Japan who wanted to build a robot for a national competition. None of them had experience in robotics. They faced so many challenges. Parts broke, designs failed, and sometimes they argued. But instead of giving up, they divided their tasks, supported each other, and learned from every mistake. When competition day arrived, their robot didn't win first place,
but it won the Innovation Award for creativity and design. One of the students said afterward, "We didn't win the trophy, but we won something better. The belief that we can create something amazing together." That's such a valuable lesson. Teamwork isn't about being perfect. It's about combining strengths and learning to grow through cooperation. This story also teaches an important English expression, to pull together, which means to work as a team to achieve something. The next real-life story takes us to Kenya, where a woman named Amina started a community garden. Her town suffered from food shortages and many families went hungry. Instead of waiting for help, Amina gathered her neighbors and began planting vegetables in unused land. At first, people doubted her idea, but as the garden grew, it brought the whole community together. Children helped water the plants, and elders shared traditional farming knowledge. Within months, the neighborhood had enough fresh food for everyone. Amina's project later inspired other towns to start similar gardens. She said, "When people grow food together, they grow hope together." That line is both poetic and powerful. It reminds us that change often starts small, with one person's decision to do something meaningful. Another remarkable story comes from a teacher named Mr. Smith, who worked at a public school in London. Many of his students came from difficult backgrounds. Some didn't believe they could ever succeed. So Mr. Smith started a dream wall in his classroom. Each student had to write their biggest dream on a piece of paper and stick it on the wall. Every week, he helped them take small steps towards that dream, learning a skill, improving their confidence, or joining a new club. Years later, one of his students became a pilot, another became a lawyer, and many others built successful lives. When asked how he inspired them, Mr. Smith said, "I just reminded them that they were already capable. They just needed to see it for themselves." His story reminds us that teachers can change lives not only by teaching lessons, but by believing in their students' potential. Now, let's talk about resilience in nature and how it connects to human life. There's a beautiful story about a forest in Iceland that was destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Everything turned to ash. People thought the forest would never return. But over time, small plants began to grow again. First moss, then grass, and then small trees. Within 20 years, the forest slowly came back to life. Scientists said it was nature's way of healing itself. This real story reminds us of human resilience. Just like the forest, we can rebuild ourselves after destruction. We may not recover overnight, but growth always finds a way. This idea is often expressed in English through the phrase, "to rise from the ashes," which means to start again after failure or loss. Here's another story that connects deeply with our emotions. It's about an elderly man named Tom who lost his wife after 50 years of marriage. For months, he felt lost and lonely. Then one day, he found an old notebook where his wife had written small daily messages. Each page had something kind or funny written on it, like, "Smile today, Tom," or "Remember, the garden loves you." Reading those messages gave him comfort. He decided to turn that idea into something positive. Tom began writing short notes of encouragement and leaving them in public places, at bus stops, in library books, on park benches. People started sharing his notes on social media, calling him the Note Man. When asked why he did it, he said, "If one person smiles today because of my note, that's enough." His story shows how even in grief, we can choose to spread light instead of darkness. Another fascinating story is about a group of scientists who discovered a new kind of coral that can survive rising ocean temperatures. Usually, coral reefs die when the water becomes too warm, but this new species adapted to the change and continued to grow. The scientists called it Hope Coral. What's interesting is that this real discovery gave people new optimism about protecting the planet. It shows that nature, just like humans, can adapt in surprising ways. Let's also talk about innovation and creativity. A young inventor named Nora from Germany noticed that millions of plastic bottles were thrown away every day. She decided to create a machine that turns used plastic into 3D printing material. Her invention reduced waste and allowed people to recycle directly at home. When she presented her project at a global conference, one reporter asked her what inspired her idea. She said, "I stopped complaining about problems and started solving them." That mindset, taking action instead of waiting, is something we can all learn from.
Good morning! Ready to start your day? Let's continue with a story that shows the power of persistence. This is about a young woman named Isabella, who dreamed of becoming a published author. She wrote her first novel when she was 18 and sent it to dozens of publishers. Every single one rejected her. She felt discouraged, but she didn't give up. Isabella kept writing, learning from her mistakes, and improving her craft. Finally, she self-published a novel online. At first, only a few people read it, but slowly her story spread. Readers praised the characters, the emotions, and the realistic dialogue. Soon, a major publisher noticed her work and offered her a contract. Isabella said, "Rejection isn't failure. It's a step toward growth." Her story reminds us that talent alone isn't enough. Persistence and patience are equally important. Next, let's hear a story about courage and standing up for others. A teenager named Kai lived in a neighborhood where bullying was common. One day, he noticed a younger student being harassed every day after school. Most kids ignored it, but Kai decided to help. He began walking with the younger student, speaking out when bullies tried to intimidate him, and reporting serious incidents to teachers. Over time, the bullying decreased because the students realized they weren't invisible and that someone cared. Kai later said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting even when you're afraid." His story shows that small actions can create big change, and bravery often starts with empathy. Now, let's look at a story about learning from unexpected experiences. A man named Raj traveled to South America for a vacation. He thought it would be relaxing, but his luggage was lost and he couldn't speak Spanish well. At first, he was frustrated, but then he started observing locals, asking simple questions and learning words day by day. He discovered new foods, traditions, and ways of thinking that he had never encountered. By the end of the trip, he not only found his luggage, but also returned home with a deeper understanding of people and culture. Raj said, "Sometimes losing what you planned is the best way to gain something unexpected." This story shows how patience and observation can turn challenges into opportunities. Let's hear another story about innovation and problem solving. A teenager named Hannah lived in a city that often faced water shortages. Instead of waiting for the government to act, she studied how rainwater could be collected and purified. Hannah designed a simple system using containers, pipes, and filters. She installed it in her school and shared the method with neighbors. Her solution worked so well that local authorities recognized her work and helped expand the project. Hannah said, "Problems are everywhere, but if you use your mind creatively, you can turn them into solutions." This story teaches us that thinking differently and taking initiative can make a real difference in communities. Now, let's look at a story about hope in the face of tragedy. A young man named David lost his home and business in a flood. He had worked for years to build a small bakery, and now everything was gone. David could have given up, but he chose to start again. He baked bread in his neighbor's kitchen using only small amounts of flour and simple ingredients. His first customers were neighbors who remembered his bakery. Slowly, the business grew again. David said, "I learned that the most important ingredient in life is hope. Without it, even the best recipe fails." His story is a reminder that recovery is always possible, even after losing what feels most important. Next, let's explore a story about friendship and loyalty. A woman named Maya had a dog named Rusty. One day, Rusty ran into a busy street and got trapped. Maya couldn't reach him and cars were passing by quickly. Without thinking, a stranger jumped into the street, rescued Rusty, and returned him to Maya. Maya offered the man a reward, but he refused. He said, "I just did what anyone should do." This act of kindness inspired Maya to volunteer at an animal shelter, helping abandoned pets and teaching others about responsibility and care. Her story shows that witnessing generosity can motivate us to contribute positively to the world. Now, here's a story about cultural understanding and connection. A young man named Tomas moved from Poland to Italy for work. At first, he felt isolated because he didn't speak the language well and struggled with local customs. One day, his neighbor invited him to a traditional festival. Tomas decided to join, even though he was nervous. During the festival, he helped decorate the streets, tried new foods, and laughed with local families. Over time, he learned Italian faster and built friendships he never expected. Tomas said, "When you step into another culture with respect, you gain more than knowledge. You gain community." This story reminds us that learning a language is not only about words, but also about understanding people and their lives. Let's move to a story about resilience and innovation. A young engineer named Amira noticed that her city had poor transportation for people with disabilities. She began designing low-cost, accessible vehicles. Many engineers doubted her because her idea was unconventional. But Amira persisted. After years of research and testing, she created a prototype that worked safely and efficiently. Her project later received national recognition, and the vehicles were adopted by several cities. Amira said, "Innovation is about believing in your vision, even when others don't." This story demonstrates that perseverance and creativity can create solutions that benefit many. Now, here's a story about personal growth through hardship. A man named Samuel grew up in a rough neighborhood and struggled in school. He often got into trouble and felt hopeless. One day, a mentor named Mr. Lee introduced him to sports
and teamwork. Through consistent practice and discipline, Samuel learned patience, focus, and leadership skills. Eventually, he earned a scholarship and later became a coach, helping young people in his neighborhood avoid the same mistakes he had made. Samuel said, "Life teaches lessons in ways we don't expect. The key is to notice them and act." His story highlights the importance of mentors and guidance, which can change the direction of a person's life. Let's continue with the story about courage and survival. A woman named Leela was traveling in a remote part of Africa when a sudden storm caused a river to flood. She was stranded on a small island with no communication and her supplies were running low. Instead of panicking, Leela used her knowledge of nature to find safe food, create shelter, and collect water. After 3 days, a rescue team found her. Leela said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting even when you're afraid." Her story shows how knowledge, preparation, and mental strength can overcome extreme challenges. Next, let's hear a story about generosity and empathy. A man named Carlos ran a small grocery store. One winter, he noticed a homeless woman coming to his store every day, shivering in the cold. He began offering her hot meals and warm clothes without expecting anything in return. Over time, other people in the neighborhood joined Carlos's efforts. The small act of kindness grew into a community initiative that helped dozens of people. Carlos said, "Generosity doesn't need recognition. It spreads quietly and grows naturally." His story demonstrates that one person's actions. Let's continue with the story about adaptability and learning from change. There was a young man named Victor who had worked for years in a traditional printing company. One day, his company announced it was closing due to digital transformation. Victor felt lost and worried because he had spent his entire career in one field. Instead of giving up, he decided to learn digital design and social media marketing. At first, it was overwhelming. The software was complicated and online courses seemed endless. But Victor practiced daily, asked for help, and experimented with small projects. Within a year, he was working as a freelance digital designer, helping businesses improve their online presence. He said, "Change is scary, but it's also an opportunity to discover new strengths." Victor's story teaches us that adapting to new circumstances is essential, and learning never stops, no matter your age or experience. Next, let's hear a story about empathy and small acts that create a ripple effect. A man named Samuel noticed that elderly neighbors in his apartment struggled to carry groceries up the stairs. Most people ignored it. Samuel decided to help by creating a simple system where volunteers took turns assisting the elderly residents. Word spread, and soon more neighbors joined. What began as one small act grew into a community network where people helped each other in many ways, cooking meals, running errands, and sharing time together. Samuel said, "Empathy multiplies when shared. One act of kindness becomes many." This story shows that even small actions, done consistently, can transform a community. Now, let's explore a story about persistence and scientific discovery. A young scientist named Layla was studying renewable energy. She faced constant challenges. Experiments failed, funding was difficult, and critics doubted her ideas. Layla refused to stop. She kept refining her methods, learning from every mistake. Finally, she developed a new type of solar panel that was both cheaper and more efficient than existing models. Her innovation helped provide electricity to rural areas that had never had access before. Layla said, "Progress is built on failure, persistence, and curiosity." Her story teaches us that adapting to new circumstances is essential, and learning never stops, no matter your age or experience. Now let's hear a story about courage and moral choice. A young man named Daniel worked in a corporate office where he discovered unethical practices that harmed customers. Many colleagues ignored it or even participated. Daniel faced a choice: stay silent to protect his job, or speak out and risk everything. He decided to report the issue even though it meant losing his position. Months later, the company changed their policies, and Daniel was offered a position at a more ethical organization. He said, "Integrity isn't about reward. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." His story reminds us that courage and honesty are often tested in real life situations. Let's move to a story about artistic passion and determination. A girl named Sophia loved painting, but grew up in a small town where art was not valued. Her family couldn't afford classes or supplies. Sophia improvised, using leftover materials and practicing daily. She shared her paintings online, and slowly people started noticing her talent. A local gallery eventually offered to showcase her work. Today, Sophia is a professional artist who teaches classes to children in her town. She said, "Passion finds a way, even when resources are limited." Her story shows how dedication and creativity can overcome obstacles and inspire others. Next, a story about courage in extreme situations. A woman named May was hiking in a mountainous region when a sudden storm trapped her on a cliff. She had no signal, limited food, and freezing temperatures. Instead of panicking, she stayed calm, built a temporary shelter, and rationed her supplies. After 2 nights, she found a safe path back to the trail. May said, "Fear is natural, but survival depends on control and calm thinking." This story teaches us that emotional control and practical thinking are essential in difficult circumstances, lessons we can apply to life and language learning. Now let's hear a story about environmental activism. A teenager named Javier grew up near a polluted river in his hometown. He noticed the negative impact on wildlife and public health. Javier started a local campaign to clean the river and educate the community about pollution. At first, people didn't take him seriously, but he persisted. Local schools and volunteers joined the project, and over the years, the river's condition improved significantly. Javier said, "One voice can spark change, but persistence turns it into action." His story reminds us that awareness and determination can have lasting effects on communities and the environment. Next, let's discuss a story about resilience and education. A woman named Nadia grew up in a refugee camp. Access to education was limited, and many people told her she wouldn't succeed. But Nadia was determined to learn. She studied whenever she could, often by candlelight, and practiced languages by talking to volunteers. Eventually, she earned a scholarship to study in a university abroad. Nadia said, "Education is freedom. It gives you the power to change your life." Her story highlights that resilience, curiosity, and determination can overcome even the toughest circumstances. Next, a story about unexpected mentorship. A young boy named Liam loved robotics but had no formal guidance. One day, a retired engineer noticed him tinkering with broken electronics in a park. The engineer began teaching Liam after school, sharing knowledge and encouraging him to experiment. Years later, Liam won an international robotics competition. He said, "Sometimes the right guidance at the right time changes everything." The story teaches us the importance of mentors and learning from those who inspire us. Next, a story about personal growth through travel. A young woman named Clara traveled alone to several countries after college. She experienced language barriers, cultural differences, and moments of loneliness. But through these experiences, she learned patience, adaptability, and communication skills. Clara said, "Travel doesn't just show you the world, it shows you who you are." Her story reminds us that stepping outside our comfort zones helps us grow emotionally, socially, and intellectually. Valuable lessons for advanced English learners who want to understand human experiences in context. Now, a story about overcoming prejudice. A man named Omar moved to a foreign country and faced discrimination because of his background. Many people underestimated him or treated him unfairly. Instead of responding with anger, Omar focused on his work, developed skills, and built strong relationships with colleagues. Years later, he became a respected manager and mentor, helping others from similar backgrounds succeed. Omar said, "Respect is earned through actions, not appearances." His story shows that patience, resilience, and character can overcome bias and create opportunities. Next, let's hear a story about community service. A woman named Lily noticed that children in her neighborhood lacked safe playgrounds. She organized volunteers to clean and build a small park. Initially, local authorities were skeptical, but the community joined, and soon the park became a safe space for children to play and learn. Lily said, "Change begins with noticing what's missing and taking action." This story teaches us the value of initiative, leadership, and working for the common good. Lessons we can describe with advanced English phrases like community engagement and social responsibility. Now, a story about facing fears creatively. A young man named Noah was afraid of heights but wanted to try rock climbing. He started with small indoor walls and gradually challenged himself outdoors. Over months, he not only conquered his fear, but also joined a climbing club where he helped others overcome their own fears. Noah said, "Fear is a signal, not a limit. Facing it opens new possibilities." His story illustrates that courage can be developed step by step, and incremental progress often leads to remarkable transformation. Next, a story about the power of observation. A photographer named Elena traveled to remote villages to capture everyday life. She spent hours simply observing people's routines, gestures, and expressions. Through patience, she captured powerful images that told stories words couldn't describe. Elena said, "Observation